Hello, hello. Welcome to the Gedunk podcast. I'm Dan Barkoff, and this is Bobby Jones.
Hello, everybody. Hello, and welcome. Welcome to everybody who's like, what the hell is this? And what is Gedunk? We'll get into all of that. We'll get into all that.
Yeah, so what the hell is Gedunk is a great question. Gedunk, which we named this podcast after, is a beloved Navy term. Actually, I don't know if it's military wide. It's certainly Navy.
Yeah.
But gedunk is the sound of a soda can, coming out the soda machine and hitting the bottom of the soda machine and going gedunk, right? And it sort of signals to people in the Navy that we're on a break here. We're chilling, we're hanging out, we're having some gedunk, we're smoking cigarettes on the fantail back in the day, and we're just bullshitting and having a good time.
Right. Right. And as it's supposed to be a break in the Coke machine and everything and other snacks that actually are on Navy ships, which I think a lot of people don't know, it also becomes your secondary diet to stay awake on watches and stuff like that. So we have subsisted and probably won combat operations based off of Gedunk, but at the same time, it doubles as this relaxing thing. It's not the best diet, but it keeps you awake. So as Dan and I, while we were in, you saw it evolve from Coke to Monsters and Red Bulls of various flavors and stuff like that, but all considered Gedunk. So it's just this commonality amongst sailors and Marines that embark on ships. They know what Gedunk is. So that's where it comes
Wait,
from.
Bobby, I gotta ask, man. So I didn't spend a ton of time on ships, and we'll get into our backgrounds a little bit here in a minute. But
Yeah.
you go to, you're on the ship, right? And you've got the mid watch, right? You've got the
Yep.
watch from midnight to 4 a.m. Or whatever it is. Are they selling energy drinks on the ship? Like, what were you
Yeah.
guys drinking
So
back in the day?
so part of the Navy supply side. So we got supply corps, supply officers, the top chop on
Yep.
board a ship. Is yes, we have all of the rations and food that comes to support our menu, our regular menu, but we also have secondary vendors and stuff. So to bring some creature comforts from home, so Cokes, uh, various potato chips, all sorts of snacks, and we sell them on ships, and the proceeds go to our MWR, Morale, Warfare, Welfare, and Recreation. That's basically the
Yep.
arm that gives us, athletic facilities on bases and stuff like that. And so your NWR, if you do it right, on deployment, you come back from deployment and you can throw a nice party for the crew based on the funds that you raise off of paying for that stuff. And
Yeah.
you gotta understand, there's nothing else really to do when you're in the middle of the ocean for months at a time besides, stand, watch, work out, and do your stuff. And so you're not spending money. The only money you're spending really goes into to Gedunk and MWR. So it really helps at the end. But yeah, when we pull alongside an oiler, so for those that don't know in the Navy, we don't necessarily pull in the port to get gas on deployment. We pull up next to an oiler and we go alongside, and these massive tons of shippage is, they're transitioning mail, food, bullets,
Right.
fuel, all this
Yep.
stuff in like a couple of hours. And along with that, you get war food and Gedunk and all those rations, and then they put them in the machines just like you were back home. So it's pretty efficient. It's pretty cool. Now looking back on it, it's kind of dangerous when you have multi-thousand tons of ships and aircraft right next to each other doing that. But
What was the
yeah,
energy drink of choice in that?
definitely Monster, the original
Yeah,
version of it, like the
yeah,
lime green. Now,
yeah.
I personally couldn't stand it. It smelled and tasted like a radiated piss to me. I don't know how. You literally developed like this taste sensation for it. But then again, I started drinking coffee. I never drunk coffee
Sure.
before I went on deployment, and I can drink it black now. Just like, hey, just put it
Yeah.
in there. It's warm and hot. I never thought.
Slice
Now
it
when I
with a
go to
knife.
Right.
Yeah.
I go to Starbucks now and I'll get like, the foo latte and this, that, and the other with vanilla. And I feel like I'm going soft as hell. But you
Well,
develop
hey,
those type
check this
things.
out. You'll like this story, man. So when I was in Iraq, there was our interpreters got this stuff. It was this Iraqi energy drink. Okay, so it had all the usual shit that was in like
Hmm.
American energy drinks, right? It had, you know, 200, 300 milligrams of caffeine or whatever, and vitamin B12 and all this stuff. And it also had ephedra, right? Do you
Oof.
remember ephedra?
Yeah. Yeah.
Ephedra was like, yeah, well, yeah. Of course, you remember ephedra. You probably taken it
Mm,
before the football games, right?
yeah.
But you know, ephedra, for those who don't know, it's banned in the U.S. now.
Hmm.
And they used to have it. It used to be like an energy drink thing, and it's basically a drug that like raises your heart rate and raises your blood pressure.
Yep.
Um, the anesthesiologist in the operating room will sometimes use ephedra to raise a patient's blood pressure. And it also had nicotine in it. So these energy drinks had
Wow.
picture a monster and then add ephedra and add nicotine to
God.
it. And it
How did your
was,
heart not explode?
dude, it kept you awake, man. Let me tell you. So, with that, maybe we should talk about who we are and
Yeah.
why you should keep listening.
Yeah. So Dan, I'm going to tee you off because for those listening or even watching, Dan Burkhoff, man, this man, phew, I don't know where they make people like him, but they're going to explain it to you. He's going to explain it to you. We have a lot of exceptional people where we went to school, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But I don't know of anybody with your background, Dan. So you got to tell us where it started, how you got to school, where we went to school, etc. Because I this is mind blowing to me.
You're being too kind, Bobby. But basically, so I'm Dan Barkoff. I'm up here in beautiful South Burlington, Vermont. It is January and there's snow outside, and I'm a New England kid. So I'm originally from Maine and then by way of Massachusetts, and ended up with Bobby at the U.S. Naval Academy. We're classmates from 2001, and
Yep.
last year I played summer and all that.
Let me
And
ask you this, Dan. Let me ask you this real quick. I'm
yeah,
going to jump in real quick and ask: was going to the Naval Academy, going to Annapolis, was that something you always wanted to do?
I don't know if always, man. Did you like for me? Going to Navy and West Point and Air Force, they were all sort of like things I was interested in doing.
Hmm.
I didn't really apply. I think when I was a kid, I applied maybe to a couple, UMass and
Hmm.
like Providence and kind of a couple of those schools. But I was always going to go to a service academy if I could get in. It was
Right.
something that just always kind of like caught my, and for
What
me, it came down to West Point versus Navy.
was it? Was it the intensity of the schools? Was it the leadership thing? What was different? Because I'm gonna be honest with you, someone who did admissions at Annapolis and stuff like that, I quickly have found out that is not the usual mindset of a 17, 16-year-old kid.
Yeah. Yeah, dude. I was kind of into all the stupid reasons that people join the military that like the reason you join the military is not the reason you stay in the military, right? Like,
Bingo.
but I joined the military because I saw Top Gun and I thought it was cool and I thought I was going to fly jets and then I realized that, I got super airsick and had to find something else. But, the it was that. It was kind of like adventurous, right? Like, it was a way to get out of a small New England town with a high school graduating class of 65 people and just, go do something cool, right? And like not from a military family or any of that stuff. And um, so I got into Navy, got into West Point, and ended up choosing Navy because, West Point is soul crushing and gray and dark and dreary and
Oh boy, I can
and
hear the West
all
Point
that
alums
stuff,
now
man,
writing
right? So all
and
the
typing.
normal reasons. But um, when we went, there was no war on, right? It
Right,
was it was 97, right? Is when
97.
we started. So yeah, so I went to Navy, walked onto the track and cross country team, and totally was a very mediocre middle distance runner, and was lucky enough when we graduated, when we service selected to go with Naval Special Warfare. So I was a SEAL. Mostly at SEAL Team 8, which is an East Coast team. Was in a Buds Class 240, and then went to SEAL Team 8 and did a little Iraq time, a little Afghanistan, and a little bit of Africa, and then ended up getting out.
Hold on.
One thing,
Hold on. Let me pause you there
yeah,
before you
yeah.
get out.
What's up?
What made you go spec war? What said I want to be that guy, like that guy, tip of the spear, most elite for fighters in the world? What clicked?
Dude, honestly, man, I didn't even think about the SEAL teams. I just wanted to try Buds, right?
Ah,
Like it was like this thing that seemed really hard, and they had this program. They had this weird program called Mini Buds, where
I
like in the
remember.
summertime you'd go out there,
Yep.
kind of get a little taste of it. You'd carry a boat around on your head and all that stuff. And I was just like, sort of like, man, I wonder if I can measure up. And that was the main driver. And then, being a SEAL, back then, this is before 9/11, right? Like it
Right.
was like, maybe you go to Bosnia, and there just wasn't a whole lot going on. It was mostly like, hey, we're gonna jump out of airplanes and blow stuff up and go to cool places, and
Right.
and then nine
You
eleven happened, and things changed, right? So
dramatically, but you
yeah,
do
yeah, man.
realize, Dan, the way that you talk about such things as I don't know, jumping the hell out of a perfectly operational aircraft
Well, I was
is
bad at that, man.
atypical of the average person, even for the military. I mean, that's why the 82nd Airborne is looked at differently. This, that, and 101st. These organizations are looked at differently because you're doing something most sane human beings would say no to. So
Yeah.
something in you is different. I don't know if your parents were like, "Hey, go play in the traffic as a kid, play Frogger." I
No,
don't know,
man, but
but
it was like it, you make these decisions when you're young, and
hmm
then all these sort of consequences follow from them. And like, the decision to like jump out of an airplane was made when I decided to, try to go to Buds, right? Like the
right,
decision to be willing to go to war and, do a foot patrol in Baghdad was made when once you're along for the ride, right? Like when you buy the ticket, you take the ride, man. And so,
yeah,
I think that's true for anything, but it was certainly true for us, right? Like we went to why'd you go to the Naval Academy, right? We're gonna get there in a second, Bobby,
yeah.
but yeah, you buy the ticket, you take the ride. So that's sort of how it happened for me, and then ended up. Over time, the SEAL teams are fantastic. As an officer on that side, there's a bit of a there's less of a pyramid and more of a stovepipe.
hmm
Like
hmm
you can stay in and keep doing jobs, and probably even more so now. But it was time for me to kind of get out once my sort of operational
hmm
shelf life had been reached, and went to medical school, and now I'm an ER doctor, which is awesome. And I'm sure we can talk about some cool ER stories at some point on this podcast.
Oh,
But
definitely. But
um,
you did not opt for the easy transition. I mean, you went from the deep fryer into the frying pan, being an ER surgeon. I mean, come on, Dan. You could have been a
dude, the ER's
pediatrician. You could have done all sorts of stuff.
yeah, but the ER's like I don't have the attention span for that shit, man. So like the thing about me that I realized, like when I knew I was going to do ER at medical school, right? So like on Monday, this is how my medical school worked, right? So on Monday, you'd have a case, and it'd be like, hey, Mr. Smith came in with chest pain, and like, here's his EKG, and like, what's on your differential, which is like kind of like your list of possibilities, and you're like, maybe Mr. Smith's having a heart attack or whatever, and you give him the medicine in the case, and you talk about treating like an acute heart attack, and all this stuff. So on Wednesday, you'd have labs on Tuesday and Thursday. And so on Wednesday, it was like now it's 6 months later, and Mr. Smith is your patient, you're Mr. Smith's cardiologist, right? And like, you're seeing Mr. Smith 6 months after his heart attack, and he's got some heart failure and that kind of stuff. And you're going to adjust his medications. And then on Friday, maybe it's all right now, Mr. Smith, it's 10 years later, and you're his primary care doctor, and you're thinking about how his heart relates to his kidneys now, and all this stuff. And my point is, I didn't
Mm.
fucking care beyond Monday. Like I was like, Monday's good, cool. Let's talk about that EKG and
Right.
what we're doing. But I never had it in me for sort of the outpatient life and all that stuff. So, yeah,
Ah.
it's fun to be at kind of
So,
ground zero for
are
us.
you a low key adrenaline junkie? I mean, think about it.
Yeah, maybe a little bit,
I
right?
mean, dude.
Yeah, yeah, but it's the stuff I liked about the military
Yeah.
you can find in medicine.
Mm.
Like there's a real purpose, right? Like, and the ER is pretty black and white
Mm-hmm.
ethically. Like we're we somebody comes in, you're trying to save their life.
Right.
That's why they're there, right? Like nobody, well, rarely do people come into the ER with a massive heart attack and they're like, don't do anything. Like, I mean, it happens if somebody's 103 years old and,
Right.
it's time to let
Right.
it go. But for the most part,
Right.
you're playing for keeps the whole time.
So,
Um,
let me ask you one follow up question to that. Right. So, you talk about it's very black and white, this, that, and the other. Are there times though where you may feel like it's overwhelming to be in that position to try to save lives because it's diametrically opposed to what you did previous, right? I remember when we were going through plebe summer, the plebe summer commander
yeah.
said, "You are here to kill people and break things on
Yes,
behalf of the United States." Do you
I
remember
remember
that?
that.
Right.
Yeah, man.
So now, fast forward 20 something years in the future, and you're breaking everything you can to save lives. Is it radically different from a perspective of now you have taken a Hippocratic oath and this, that, and the other, which is different than the oath that you took? I mean, I find this psychologically fascinating, right? Because you were trained to
There's
use
a
the most
there's a
lethal
few of
weapon we
us, man.
have.
Yeah, there's a few of us. So like, there's at least I can think of at least four SEALs that I know, no,
Mm,
five, who off the top of my head are now physicians. And yeah, it's a different gig, but it's the principles are the same in
right.
in some regards, right? Like
Hmm.
you've got something important to do, right? Like
Right.
you're doing something that's important, whether it's get eyes on the target in Afghanistan or to get somebody the right medication so they don't die. And so that part is very different, but it's still life and death stuff. So
Right.
the importance is still there, and so that's kind of the attractive stuff. That's what makes it cool is, and feeling the import of doing something, like doing something and having a skill that you can help out, right? Like you can pitch
Hmm.
in when the shit hits the fan. Like that's the thing that I've always been attracted to and wanted to do.
It's funny because I think the one word to describe you and your experiences is intense. I mean, you come from New England, which has a reputation of being kind of low key and this, that, and the other. But dude, from the time you step foot at Annapolis to now, it's just been intense experiences. And what I mean by that is dealing with high pressure situations. Saving someone's life is a high pressure situation. Going on patrol on foot in Iraq or Afghanistan is high pressure. And the thing that is amazing to me is, right, people like you who do this, not only do you downplay it, you very rarely talk about what it takes to be that. And that's one of the reasons we're doing this show. What does
Yeah.
it take to be that dude that does that? And most importantly, have the wherewithal and the mindset to understand it's nothing to brag about. It's something that you do. You know what I'm saying? And you hope the next generation does it too. It's to be quietly applauded. You know what I'm saying?
It's a great question, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so, you know, some of the stuff that I've done in my life has been um, maybe, to the uninformed, seems exciting or cool or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, it really feels pretty pedestrian, right? Because I know a ton of Navy SEALs, and I know a ton of
Yep.
Navy SEAls who did a lot more than I did. And I
Right.
know a ton of emergency room doctors. And I know a ton of emergency room doctors who, so there are people out there. And so, that's one of the things I think we want to talk about is like how you can find kind of your purpose and your meaning and what gets you going, right? Like what do
Hmm.
you like in life and how you can kind of seek that out and make a life in which you can have those experiences and give back in those areas that you find interesting because you're always going to be best at things you're interested in.
Right.
You know what I mean? So
Yeah. No.
all right, man.
And let me just say this too, Dan, real quick to put a bow on that. There's a lot of people in society now that brag about their exploits, no matter how minor, how trivial they are, right? But what I have found is, and you're one of these people. The true badasses just do what they do. They don't brag about it. They don't talk about it, and it without setting an example, you set an example, right? There is nobody that I know of, right, that has accomplished the type of things that you have that has been braggadocious about it. That's the commonality between people like you and others that do this. Whether you are the emergency room doctor, I dealt with Doctors Without Borders on one of my tours in
Oh,
Africa and
cool,
stuff
man.
like that. They
Yeah,
just they
yeah,
just do the work. They
yeah.
do the work and then they go back home and they try to blend back in with their society. But here's the key: they ask themselves, "What can I do?" And that's the question that I, honest to God, think has vanished from public society. What can I do? Sort of like what Kennedy said in the 60s about ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. That question is not asked anymore, right?
No, you're
And
right.
so,
And so Sebastian Younger,
mhm,
we're gonna have him on the pod. Great dude. I've worked with him
yep,
on a couple projects in the past, but he does this. He wrote something, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he basically was like, when when we don't ask people, specifically young men, right? Like we don't
hmm
ask something of young men. We don't say, "Hey, we need you to do this."
hmm
That leads to kind of this emptiness. Like everyone wants to feel needed. What one of the things, the best feeling in the world to me as an ER doctor is like someone comes and grabs me and is like, "Hey, there's this new patient in room 6. Can you come see him right now?" It's like, "Yeah, let's do it." That's why that job is fun, right? And so we don't ask that in a lot of
right,
ways from our young
right,
men.
right,
And when we don't ask that, they're going to find their own way to sort of fill their time, and
hmm
um, they're not going to feel valued. And
yep,
really, if you feel value, if you feel like you're adding value and you feel like people need you and people depend on you,
right,
that's human nature, right? Like that releases the dopamine. That gets you going more than
hmm
anything is somebody saying, "Hey, Bobby, man, I need you on this."
yep.
Right?
No,
Well, okay, Bobby. So no, I'm cutting you off, man. So you got to tell me about it. So how did you end up at
so
the
it's
old, the old United States Naval Academy?
So it's kind of funny because what you just said has a lot to do with how I wound up going to school with you and everybody else, right? A question was asked that defined purpose for me. So a little bit about me. I'm from Fayetteville, Georgia, right outside of Atlanta. My mom and dad were very big on education, and part of it is because they went through their extreme situations to get education in general. My dad grew up, in the deep South in northern Florida, where in a lot of places they still think they're fighting the Civil War. Deep
Yep.
segregation. He grew up
Yep.
about 20 miles from the University of Florida. Great athlete, was good. So good, in fact, that he should have played college football at the University of Florida. But because of the timing and when he grew up and where, he was not offered a full scholarship to go. He would have been the first black player at UF, but he went to Virginia Union, HBCU,
Okay.
historically black
Yeah.
college in
Yeah.
Richmond. Good enough to play there, be an All American, and got drafted by the Cincinnati Bengals in the early 70s by the legendary Paul Brown, and his offensive coordinator was Bill Walsh, the guy that built the 49ers dynasty. Well,
Yeah.
played in Cincinnati, went to Atlanta eventually, where he met my mother. My mother had just moved to Atlanta because she was starting over. She had my sister at 16, teenage mom. She needed to restart her life. Came to Atlanta. Lo and behold, they meet. I'm born, and 4 years later, my brother is born. Education is a big deal. The school that I wound up graduating high school from basically recruited me there in 7th grade. It's one of the top 20 high schools in America. It's the Westminster Schools in Atlanta. Multi-million-dollar endowment, like in the 230-something million, whatever. Elite. Yeah, elite.
Yeah.
It's a high school, right? Like a 200-acre campus, etc., right? Went there. Didn't want to go there because I was one of the few people that was black that was there at the time. They were basically reintegrating the school, and I'm sitting there in 8th grade, and
this is like 93, 92,
yeah, like 92, yeah, 92, 93.
Yeah.
I'm sitting down on one of the steps talking to one of my boys, and the assistant headmaster, she walks up to me. I'll never forget this, and she asked me a very simple question. She's like, "Mr. Jones." I go, "Yes, ma'am, Miss Cleghorn. What can I do for you?" She's like, "What are you going to do with the rest of your life?" Just the most random question I think I've ever been asked in my entire life. And I said, "Ma'am, I really hadn't thought about it. I'm just trying to make it through the day," which was an accurate statement. I was just trying to make it through these ridiculous classes. I lived further than anybody else at Westminster at the time, so it took me over an hour to get to school every day. And she looked at me and she said, "There's something to be said for a life of service," and just walked off. That's like the only conversation I had with that lady my entire time.
That would be like
school.
that would be like in a movie, man.
Yeah, that's what it kind of was. So I get into high school, and I start playing sports. My dad allows me to play football my junior year. And I took to it like a duck to water. I'm getting recruited by all these.
Why didn't you
schools.
want you, like, because of head injuries, or like what was this?
Well, no, not even head injuries. My dad was just like, "There's no point in beating yourself up when you're younger, and most of the coaches don't know what they're doing." And so, and he was right, to be honest with you. So I did football junior year, but I started doing track and basketball, earlier. And I was in the AAU basketball circuit in
Nice.
junior high and high school, which is intense, and there are a hell of a lot of athletes in that. That I went and played football and took to it so well that next thing I know, I'm getting letters to be recruited. Coaches are visiting from all over because I'm at one of the top schools in the country. I'm pulling close to a 1,300 SAT, 3-point whatever GPA, playing 3 sports and being in the band and ensemble. So I'm like this well-rounded kid. And the reason I was doing all of that.
The band, dude?
Oh, I played tuba. I was all state. Matter of fact,
man.
when I got to Annapolis, I went to D&B during plebe summer to see if I could do both football and D&B, and the coaches found out, and they damn near wanted to kill me. So that's a whole other story. But anyway, so I do all of this, right? And I saw the first time I really heard about the Naval Academy, I was in 9th grade. And you remember back in the day, they used to have these college catalogs for every college. They would send them to your high school or they send them to your house.
Sure.
And so someone had been looking at the Naval Academy. I knew it was a Navy school, didn't know anything. And it was a cover of 5 midshipmen in their parade dress uniforms with their swords out from every background. It was very strategically done right there in Memorial Hall. I was like, man, that's cool looking. So I opened it up, started reading through. I'm like, man, these guys have to take a lot of classes. Man, they got to do a lot of this. They got to do a lot of that. And I was like, maybe I could do that. And so I talked to my mom and dad, and my mom and dad were like, son, that's a hard school to get into, but maybe, if you work real hard, you can do it. Fast forward to them getting recruited, I'm not getting any letters from West Point, Annapolis, Colorado Springs, Air Force, none of them.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why? And so Paul Johnson, who winds up eventually becoming head coach at Navy, was offensive coordinator, and he came down to recruit our quarterback, who wound up actually playing football at West Point. But I run into him randomly. I'm like, hey man, you coach at that Navy school? I'd like to look at that. He was like, what do you mean you'd like to look at it? He was like, I would like to try to go there. I'm like trying to apply. He's like, you want to do that? I go, yes, sir. He goes, you got options. You realize? I go, yeah, but I'd like to look at it. They overnighted all this stuff to me, right? And so I go and I do summer seminar. Mm-hmm. And got yelled at. And all
summer seminar, for those of you who don't know, Bobby, give a little.
Yeah, summer seminar, I eventually ran it, is this thing that they do for rising high school seniors the summer before your senior year, where you get to be a midshipman for a week. They go, you take these heavy technical classes, and then like the last day, they really put you through the ringer, like plebe year, plebe summer type stuff. So I did both Air Forces and I did Navies. And I was like, okay, that's cute. But now football schools are really recruiting me. Tennessee. So I get to go take my official visit with Jamal Lewis, who won a Super Bowl, Kosi Coleman, who won a Super Bowl. All of us were from Atlanta. We went up to Tennessee. And I'm the only guy that recruiting trip from Atlanta did not go to Tennessee. We watched Peyton Manning versus Danny Warfel, the game of the century.
Shit, dude.
Danny Warfel wins the Heisman. Florida wins the national championship that year. I watched Peyton Manning throw 4 interceptions from the sideline. I'm like,
Dude,
oh my God.
Tennessee.
But yeah, so to go to Tennessee, unbelievable football atmosphere. But the one thing that annoyed me was I never saw a classroom when I went there. So I go all on my these other official visits, Georgia Tech, North Carolina, and I was going to declare I was going to go to North Carolina. That's where I was going to go. North Carolina, top 5 public school in the country. Michael Jordan went there. Lawrence Taylor went there. 4-to-1 girl to guy ratio. Let me make sure I'm abundantly clear. 4-to-1 beautiful Southern Belles to one guy. There's nothing else for me to talk about. But I didn't declare because my mom wasn't on the visit with me. My dad said she'd kill both of us if you did that. So I get home and she said, you promised the Navy coaches you take a visit up there. And I'm like, I don't want to go up there. I went up there for summer seminar. I know they're going to yell, but she made me go. So we go up there. And instead of like having the cute girls show you around like they do at all the other campuses, I get this big, huge middle linebacker from Midland, Texas named Clint Bruce, who I'm sure you know because he went Navy SEAL too. And he's sitting there with a little dip in his mouth. Is like, let's go. So I'm not in a 5-star hotel. I'm in a cot in a military wool blanket in Bancroft Hall on my visit. We go to thermodynamics as a class in the afternoon. I watch formation. I watch all this stuff. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Based on what I just saw at these other schools, there's no way in hell I'm coming here. So the final thing they had me do, we go to Navy Marine Corps Memorial Stadium. And this is pre-renovation, but still, it's Navy Marine Corps Memorial Stadium. You walk in. Now, as someone who went to Tennessee, went to Georgia, I see the national championship for 1980 in Georgia, the SEC championships, 82, 80, whatever. You walk in the Navy Marine Corps Memorial Stadium. For those who don't know, you have every battle the Navy and the Marine Corps has fought since World War I in chronological order on that stadium, on the facade. So it starts with Bellawood and now ends with Afghanistan and Iraq. It's insane. Pearl Harbor, Midway, Wake, Hue City. I mean, you name it, it's on that stadium. And it hit me for the first time that this is different. And Miss Cleghorn's question in the back of my mind came back. What are you going to do with the rest of your life? There's something to be said for a life of service. I walk into the football locker room, right? And again, other schools, you'll have like a famous alum that played ball there talking about this, that, and the other. At that time, they had the offense on one side, the defense on the other side, and in the middle, special teams. And there was a quote over each wall. On the offensive side, it had the quote, "He who cannot risk cannot win." John Paul Jones, Captain United States Navy, father of the United States Navy. On the defensive side, it had hit hard, hit fast, hit often. William F. Halsey Jr., Fleet Admiral, Victor of South Pacific, Navy fullback, right? And I'm like, okay, that's different. And then in the middle, it was like excellence without arrogance is what it eventually said up there over special teams. And Clint looked at me, along with Enrico Hunter and Desmond Morgan, I'll never forget. They were like, this place is different. We don't beg anybody to come here. Either you understand it and you hear the call or you don't. But when you leave this locker room, you will have made a decision. And they left. And I'm sitting in that locker room for like 20 minutes, racking my mind. Do I really want to do this? What am I giving up? But then I stopped asking that question and I started asking, what if I don't? Will I regret this the rest of my life? And then if not me, then who? So I came out, I told them, okay, I want to come here. And they made me call University of Virginia because I was going to go down there right after to Charlottesville. And I had to call the head coach, who happened to be George Wells, class of 56 out of Annapolis. And I told him, I got to go here. I can't explain it. And he was the first quarterback, if I'm not mistaken, when they dedicated, or right after he was an assistant or graduate assistant at Navy Marine Corps Memorial Stadium. He said, I understand. I get it. You don't have to explain it to me. I get it. And so, July 1st, I show up with you, and I wanted to go home July 2nd, probably unlike you.
No.
And then, I struggled through there. My first year was absolute hell. I was part of the Square Root Club where I had, if you took the square root of my GPA, it goes up. That's what that means, Square Root Club. And I remember asking myself, do I really want to be here? I was catching hell for all sorts of little stupid stuff. But I made up my mind after talking to Commander Wesley Brown, the first black graduate of the Naval Academy. He's like, why are you letting other people dictate your life? That was the question he asked me. And it's like a switch went off. So I busted my butt. I made up my classes, did not have any summers because of football and summer training. And I graduated dead last in our class on time, 902, 902.
What happened at graduation, Bobby?
Oh, see, I was trying to move past this. So graduation, the day before graduation, we had graduation rehearsal. If y'all recall, they announced who the class anchorman was. So if you graduate dead last in your class, you are called the class anchorman at Annapolis. If you do that at West Point, you are called the GOAT because it's supposed to insult us, whatever. So you get $1 from everybody in the class. I got about $880 because all the football seniors stiffed me. They did not give me $1. They thought they contributed to my delinquency, and they were correct. So I collect the money. It's a graduation. I go take it and deposit it in Navy Federal like I'm supposed to. Yeah. I missed the briefing that you guys got, okay, on what to do and what not to do with the President of the United States of America.
Right.
So when graduation comes around the next day and they call my name, I absolutely lose my shit. I lose my complete mind. I'm jumping up and down. I'm high-fiving people. And I hug the president. And then when I realized I hugged the president, I kind of picked him up. Secret Service frowns upon such actions towards the leader of the free world.
And hey, I got to set the stage here for a second, man. So George W. Bush is not that big, right?
No,
he's probably what, 5'8"?
At best 5'9", 5'10".
Yeah, and not a big dude. And Bobby, how big are you?
I was at that time I was 6'3", right at 240 pounds. Just got the play ball.
Yeah, so
nobody fat.
It was a bear hug, and there's footage. You guys, we'll link to it at some point. Google it, man. And so Bobby picks up the president and kind of spins him around a little bit, and then
I put him down because Admiral Locklear was not happy. And he says to me, he goes, "Damn, you're happy." I go, "Yes, sir. It's been a struggle to get through here." He goes, "Well, don't worry about it." He goes, "I made C's at Yale, and I'm president of the United States, so it really doesn't matter." That's what he told me. What I didn't realize was that it started like this pen pal thing over the years. As a matter of fact, I got to write him here for 2025 and just see how he's doing and stuff. But he kept up with my career even after he left the White House. Fast forward 4 years, I was back there, and I was mentioning the speech he gave to the class of 2005 as far as what we had started to do in the global war on terrorism. Yeah. And that's the thing, Dan. None of us sitting there that day knew what was coming. But 109 days later, the world changed, right? We joined the Navy post Cold War, no real direction. Everybody's like, hey, serve your time, serve your country, go do something else with your life.
5 and dive, right?
Yeah, 5 and dive is what we called it.
And then saying, you do your 5 years and then you get out and go
and try to live a regular life, knowing that you have served your country. What happened after we graduated? I cannot tell you the ripple effect it had on me personally, like it had a lot on us. If you are the class of 2001, out of Annapolis, West Point, Colorado Springs, Kings Point, Merchant Marine, it don't matter where. If you were ROTC, if you enlisted that year, your life changed. And I don't think the American people, I'm going to anchor on this, the American people do not realize that our generation fought the longest continuous conflict in American history. Okay? Yep. If you draw September 11th to August 31st of 2021, and I'm in the Middle East in command. My entire career, our entire careers were fighting that war. That is 20 years. 20 years. No one talks about it.
Yeah, it's wild, man, and it's 20 years with, I when I got out in '09,
Hmm.
so I was in from '01 to '09, and at that point Iraq was kind of winding down, but this was like before ISIS, but
Yep.
Afghanistan was still super
Super hot.
turbocharged, and you fought this 20-year war with a volunteer force, right? Like
That's the
so,
piece.
you know, and so we're gonna dive into all this stuff, eventually, but um, it's different when when you have to convince people to join and stay
Hmm.
in
Hmm.
to fight your wars,
Hmm.
right? And so the ways we do that or we did that rather, are they have consequences sometimes, and
Very
so
much so.
it's a little different than other historical wars because everyone signed on the dotted line,
Right.
so
Well, I tell people the difference between what we went through and previous wars, like World War II, heck, even Vietnam because of the draft. America was at war during those
right,
times. America's military was at war with us. There was
yeah,
a line of demarcation between those that served in the global war on terrorism and everybody else.
yeah,
The fact that, okay, especially right after 9/11, people put stickers on their car, wave, but it wasn't like recruiting went through the roof after that,
sure,
right?
yeah,
And here's the thing, you hit on this. It's the same families that stayed in, the same families generation after generation that keep serving. And what you have is a dedicated warrior class of families in America that has been shrinking, and they're being used again, 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 without that infusion of new blood in there.
sure,
And you know, my career, I started out in Japan, and we were dealing with China and Russia while everybody was focusing on Afghanistan and Iraq. And
totally.
then, I finally go into the Middle East, as an XO and this, that on Anzio, USS Anzio, and then 10 of our sailors get kidnapped. We're the ones that recovered them. I got stories for days, and we'll get into that.
Oh yeah,
But here's the thing, when you take the average person that was in our class that serves 20 years, heck, I'll take it for served 10 years. So you're right there at that 10-year mark. You can speak to this too. You had to be not just a competent naval officer, not just a competent operator. You had to be part State Department, because a lot of what people thought America was their interaction with you. You had to be not just part State Department. You had to be chief business negotiator. Like, how do you allow these goods to come do this? We had to do so many things that we were not classically trained to do,
sure.
because you're dealing with these operations that are not nation state versus nation state. And I'm going to say something that may be controversial, but it's true. The Department of State wanted no parts of a lot of this. They revolted against Condoleezza Rice. I'll never forget that town hall they had where they were like, we don't want to go to Iraq and Afghanistan. And I'll never forget, I heard this, and my question was very simple. Then why are you here? What the hell is your job? It's
Yeah.
not to sit there and drink with your pinky out when things are nice and you get to high. Lives were on the line. So Dan, you had to negotiate stuff. I know that. Shoot, I'm in East Timor. It's the world's newest country in 2002, on the beaches dealing with tribal leaders who have machetes in their hand to cut through. I'm like, dude, what? I'm 22, and nowhere in my time in Annapolis prepared me for that.
No, it's true, man. There's some wild things that you just got to kind of figure out as you go, especially working with all the different militaries
Yes.
and all that stuff. So, well, Bobby, why don't we talk a little bit about where we see this show going,
Yeah.
because I did
Yeah.
want to say that this is not going to be. I mean, we're going to talk about the military and
Hmm.
the war and all that stuff, and we're going to talk about what it means, but we're going to have some fun too. So we're going to talk sports.
Yep.
We're going to talk about fun things, whiskey. We're going to talk about tobacco. We're going to get some great guests on here. We're going to talk to
Yes.
some NBA owners. We're going to talk to some NFL players. We're going to talk
Yep.
to a bunch of people who have done interesting stuff, and primarily but not exclusively men. And
Yep.
we're going to talk about what it's like to be to be a young man in America in
Yep.
2025. So
Yep.
with
No,
that, we got some sporting news. I mean, this is a good time of year. We got the NFL playoffs.
Yes.
We've
Yes.
got college basketball's heating up. The NBA, they're
Yes.
finally starting to play the superstars,
Hmm.
all that sort of stuff. So, I mean, this is a fun time of year sports wise. Bobby, do you do any, like, are you a fantasy guy? Are you doing any of that stuff?
I do fantasy. As a matter of fact, there's a league that a bunch of former Navy football players are in that
Oh,
I have
nice.
yet to win. Scott Streismeyer, the sports
Oh,
information
yeah.
director at Navy, is the guy that runs it. And it's interesting. And I'm going to tell you why. The NFL, its parity is what makes it popular.
Sure.
Any team can win, the salary cap, this, that, and the other. But you have these players that are supposed to be that dude, especially when it comes to producing stats. And I tell you, every year, I am always disappointed in the people that I personally draft because I'm trying to project and not look backwards. It's infuriating. But it's kind of funny. I'm going to use this as a segue into something too with college football and the pros. Recently in New England, your neck of the woods, they just
Yeah.
hired Mike Vrabel as
Yep.
as coach. And the reason they did this so effectively, so quickly, was because of college football. Ryan Day is the coach at Ohio State. At the time of this recording, they're getting ready to play for the national championships against University of Notre Dame. Ryan Day was on the hot seat because he lost to Michigan again, right?
Yep.
Before this little run. Mike Vrabel was available to be head coach. He went to Ohio State. He's a Belichick disciple. He's that guy. To be quite
Yeah.
honest with you, Tennessee should not have let him go.
Wildly popular in New England. Like everyone loved
Yes.
Vrabel when he was playing. Yep.
Yes. Um, the New England Patriots did not know that he was going to be available when they made the Gerard Mayo hire.
Yep.
And because of the power and the money that's in college football now, way different than when we were in college, right? New England fired their coach after only one season and go and hires Vrabel before Ohio State could even consider putting their hands on him, right?
Yep.
To show you how crazy life is now in 2025, college football now is influencing the NFL and not the other way around.
That's
You know?
wild, man. And the NIL stuff is the name, image, likeness, right? Like that. We got to bring someone on here and ask some
Yes.
questions about that, man, because this has really been a game changer. The NIL stuff. What is it? Ohio State had like a 20 million that they're doing NIL. I
It's
mean, it's
it's
nuts.
unbelievable. We're talking about basically a soft salary cap that's going to be implemented at the NCAA level. Now, for those who don't understand what this is,
Yeah,
for the longest
give
time,
us a brief.
yeah, for the longest time in college sports, an individual athlete, the only thing that they could get as compensation for playing for a school is free room and board, food stipend, and like a little stipend to help them survive. So you had a lot of players that literally were like impoverished that were in college. Well, that was dumb for many reasons because it's the only place in American society where that was legal, right? And so Ed O'Bannon, who played basketball at UCLA,
Yep.
happened to watch NCAA basketball, the video game, and saw a dude that looked just like him with his number, left-handed just like him, on the game. And he didn't receive a dime. And this man had flamed out in the NBA, so he sued the NCAA, saying, where in American society is this legal? Turns out he was right. And so now players could get paid. Now, the payment is based on the market value of a player and where they play, et cetera, et cetera. And so schools had to ask their alumni to raise money, and they call these things collectives, where they create the money and they pay these kids. So to understand how these kids are getting paid, as someone who's at, like I said, UGA now, these kids will get paid $40,000 a month, or $50,000 a month, or $100,000 a month, depending on the position. Or Carson Beck, who just left Georgia and is now going to the University of Miami, it's rumored he's going to get paid $4 million for one season at the University of Miami. $4 million,
Holy shit.
which stopped him. He had originally declared for the NFL draft, but he's grading out to be a round 3 prospect. He can get $4 million guaranteed at the University of Miami instead of being eligible and going into the NFL draft, where he would make a lot less money that's not guaranteed. That's
Right,
how
because it's like a rookie
powerful
deal,
this is.
right?
Exactly. He's making more money being a fifth-year senior at Miami Oh, and plus his girlfriend, who's a social media star, plays basketball. She's down there.
Yeah.
And he drives a Lamborghini and this, that, and the other. But he's going to make more money doing that. Now, what's spectacular to me about this is now every offseason is free agency in college football. You have kids
Yeah.
that enter the transfer portal. They have a certain amount of time where they can sign with another school. And so you see this shuffling of people. Here's what's amazing. The schools that are not doing this because they're not allowed to, Army, Navy, Air Force. It is not a coincidence that Army and Navy and Air Force towards the end had their best seasons collectively in over 50 years. Why is that? Because we cannot give NIL money because you are literally enlisted into the military, number one.
Right.
Number two, the way it works at service academies, no matter if you play sports or not, you can stay there without any penalty until the beginning of your junior year. Once your junior year starts, those
Right.
those 2 years lock you in for a total of 7 years. So 2 years you're there and 5 years of committed service. It's called 2 for 7.
Yep.
That right there means if you start school your junior year as an athlete, you're not leaving. You're going to stay. So what happens is, what happened this past year, Army and Navy were able to develop players in their system for 4 continuous years, even though they were
Sure.
borderline Division I players, because if you think you're going to the NFL, you don't go to service academies, but they were borderline.
Right.
But the 4 years of development, right, that West Point and Annapolis football players, using them as an example, get, you go out and you can beat Oklahoma when you have no business beating
Totally.
Oklahoma. You can
Sure.
go out and beat Tulane and Ole Miss. It doesn't matter the team. Now you have guys that have bought into your system. You have developed a team instead of these free agent mercenary types that's happening here. So what's interesting to me is if you are a Division I college football coach and you're thinking about this logically, are you going to try to assemble a team every year like you're a general manager in professional sports? Or are you going to go one step down and not get that 5-star recruit, but maybe that 3-star, and then develop them over the 4 years? It's going to be a philosophical question that I'm dying to see what wins out, because right now no
Yeah.
one knows. Look at
That's
Notre Dame. They have a lot of guys that have been there 4 years.
Yeah, I mean, you can see the value in that, right? I mean, it's true in basketball as well, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
you have the one and done, and that's been going on for a while in college
Yep. Yep.
basketball. But yes, if you have Cooper Flag on your team and he's going to do a one and done for that year, you're going to have Cooper Flag. But
Right.
when it comes to NCAA tourney time, if you've got 4 5th-year seniors, and this is what like schools like Princeton did. They're like, hey man, it's taken us 5 years to figure out how to do this backdoor cut, and we're going to do it, and we're going to ride it to 3 wins in the
Exactly.
tourney. It's
Exactly.
that's a really interesting point, man. Yeah, I can see if you're a college coach, especially at a mid-major. In basketball, I'm thinking of something like a University of Vermont, or maybe a Big East school or something like that,
Right.
where you're not dealing with these true blue bloods. What's a
Right.
what's a you know what's a I mean, like in the football equivalent of that would be like I don't know, maybe a Utah or something like
Mm-hmm.
that. It's a
Right.
good school, but it's not
Right.
it's
But it's not going to
Alabama.
be right there in
Right.
that classic, top 10 schools. Here's my thing, right? I think this is fascinating for 2 major reasons. In 2025, individuality is what's the most marketable thing to a lot of people.
Sure.
Instagram,
Yep.
YouTube, you
Your
name it.
brand, right? Your personal brand, Bobby.
Right, your personal brand is what's supposed to matter. That is diametrically opposed to what college football is, where the brand of the school, the community it represents. You go to Texas A&M and you tell people at Texas A&M it's about me, they're going to laugh you out of there,
Yeah.
right? It's about them, the collective we. And this is where something's going to have to give. You have to develop, in my humble opinion, this is not just for sports, but as universities are looking at how to go about their marketing and how to attract a smaller base of students as we're shrinking here, and that's a whole other thing we can talk about. How do you get kids to buy into the school? into the institution. We at the service academies, for example, Army, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard, Merchant Marine, we have this thing called plebe summer that indoctrinates you into saying, you may be the most talented kid in your hometown. It's no longer about you. And from this point on, it will never be about you. And I don't care what anybody says, that is huge as far as the mindset. Boot camp, if you enlist in the Army, the Navy, you go to Great Lakes in the Navy, that's 13, 14, 15 weeks of them saying it's not about you. It's not about you. And so this is this collective advantage, in my opinion, where service academies for our entire lifetime were seen as having a disadvantage when it came to playing high-level sports, team sports in particular. This is the advantage that I think is going to be exploited, and we're going to kick the crap out of teams that they don't see coming because of this, and they can't replicate that. But most importantly, a lot of these coaches and big-time donors don't want to replicate it. They want that instant fix of winning now, winning now, winning now. And I'm dying to see how university presidents, how athletic directors, but most importantly, the fan bases of these schools, like I'm using Oklahoma as an example. United States Naval Academy beat Oklahoma in a bowl game. Okay, let that marinate. Not one kid on Navy's team even got a letter from Oklahoma. Okay, not even a letter. Forget recruiting and a scholarship offer. Shouldn't even be on the same field. But here's the deal: we win the game, right? We had a 10-win season. Oklahoma did not. These changes are going to be interesting to see moving forward, because I honestly think it's going to force universities to have a reckoning as far as how they perceive themselves and how they perceive individual talent.
Yeah, well, it's like that Moneyball thing, man. You know, Moneyball, you read Moneyball, right? Yeah, or saw the movie or whatever. So, like, you know, Moneyball and all the Bill James stuff was based on the idea that there were inefficiencies in the market for players, right? And the most important thing was getting on base. And, you know, if you could get on base, you could score runs, you win games. That was what was important. And all these other things, batting average, yada, yada, was, you know, not important. So there's going to be, NIL is going to create some inefficiencies, I think. And I think that's what, you know, you're hitting on. It'll be, I think that's a really cool point. We should definitely have someone on to talk about it. On that note, we're about an hour now. So if you've listened this far, guys, hey, thanks for listening. This is going to be a fun show. This is going to be your show as well. We're going to do topics that you guys want to hear about. And with that, I'll turn it over to Bobby for the last word.
Yeah, no, just thanks for listening. And believe you me, you're going to find some very interesting topics and interesting points of views. The one thing, Dan and I have been around the world. We've seen the best of humanity and the worst of humanity. And we have chose to be vocal about our observations. And most importantly, we're going to challenge you guys. You'll be able to email us directly and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking. Because the bottom line is, we need to have a communal discussion about things that are happening around us. And there are podcasts after podcasts that try to do this. The difference between me and Dan is very simple. We realize it's not about us. It will never be about us. It's about y'all. How can we, the collective we, do better than what we're doing? And, you know, what does it mean to be a young man specifically, or just a young person in 2025? Because we were asked questions that challenged us to go do some pretty ridiculous things, some great things. We need to re-ask that question for this generation and help give them some guidance along the way. So we hope you join us on the journey, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Couldn't have said it better myself. You guys, we need to ask more from y'all, not less. So stay in, and thanks for listening, and hope to see you again soon.